right, good evening to everyone here in person and all of those of you joining us online tonight. I'm Cindy Duggan, and I'm so happy you're part of our History Talk this evening. Before we get into our History Talk for tonight, I want to invite each of you to our big event that we will be having a week from tonight, Thursday, April 18th. Lafayette Academy will be hosting our Resetting the Stage Gala with a nationally recognized keynote speaker, Dr. Carol Swain. Dr. Swain earned 5 degrees and obtained early tenure at Princeton and full professorship at Vanderbilt, where she was a professor of political science and a professor of law. Today, she is a sought-after news contributor, prominent national speaker, and best-selling author. In addition to 3 presidential appointments, Dr. Swain is a former distinguished senior fellow for constitutional studies with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, having served on the Tennessee Advisory Committee to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the 1776 Commission. And Dr. Swain's impressive list of accomplishments continues. So if you haven't gotten your tickets for this special evening next week to hear Dr. Swain, tickets are still available by going to our website at LafayetteAcademy.org. Tonight, we have the pleasure of hearing from Lafayette Academy's in-house historian, Mr. Keith Preston. Tonight's history presentation should be one of our most timely of this series. This November, Americans will go to the polls and vote to elect the 47th President of the United States. The history of our process, constitutional and otherwise, has been a fascinating mix of constitutional amendments and secret skullduggery. Mr. Preston's first experience in presidential elections was stuffing envelopes in the 1968 election. As a young man, at one point, he ended up participating in a protest by both Democrats and Republicans of a rally where segregationist Governor George Wallace was campaigning as a third-party candidate. It was inspiring to see freedom of speech together with a unified effort from both of the ideological spectrums against a message that was contrary to our national vision of a colorblind America. Now let's take a look at what the history of our election process has been and how it has evolved over the last 200 plus years. Mr. Preston.
Thank you, Mrs. Duggan. I actually wrote that introduction, and I noticed right away I made a mistake. And that is that if Mr. Biden is reelected, he will still be the 46th President of the United States. And so here I'm watching that and going, wait a minute. So you never know sometimes in the excitement of pulling these things together. All right, so I've got a lot of things that I want to be able to get to, and I want to be able to do it in a way that doesn't make everyone feel like we're out there trying to run a 4-minute mile. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. This will be a presentation that covers a couple of different concepts. Number one is, what kind of process have we used to choose the President of the United States? And the second thing is some of the more unusual results of that process. I remember going through the election of 2020 and watching all the different things each day as that was going on. And many of us are old enough here to remember the 2000 election and hanging chads and all those things. And I will have something about that there. But there are also some that you probably don't know much about. That have been unusual elections that we've had in American history. So I will deal with some of those as well. So how does the United States choose a president? And the most important thing to understand, it really is true, after the revolution, it was an evolution. This was something that we really did not have in our background. One of the things I talk to my students about when I talk about the colonial period of time leading up to the American Revolution is that democratically elected legislatures were an ongoing thing. in colonial America, something that we were used to. We did almost 150 years of elections in the British colonies in North America before we got our independence. What we were not used to most of the time was an election of a chief executive. Those were really appointed most of the time by the king. So you would have a royal governor and then you'd have a colonial legislature. So when the Constitutional Convention happened in the summer of 1787, the choice of who they were going to choose once they had decided we need to have some sort of chief executive was pretty obvious. It's going to be Washington. He's the man that everyone trusted in that revolution to be fair, no matter what state you were from, or at that time, what former colony you were from. So that's going to be Washington. But what's going to happen down the line? In fact, I used to show the kids a PBS series called Liberty, which I highly recommend if you ever get a chance to see it. There's like 6 episodes in it. And in one of them, they have a letter from a guy who was writing to a friend. He says, yes, we know it's going to be Washington, but what about the next president? What about Sloshington or whoever it happens to be? How do we know what we're going to get? And what process should we be using to choose this person? So the real challenge for the framers at the convention is how are we going to choose a chief executive? And in the end, what they were most firm on was that the states should choose the president, not a population at large, but the states. And this is something I always kind of rankle a little about when I hear people say, yeah, but the popular vote, the popular vote. There's a reason they didn't do that. The framers did not want a straight democracy. A straight democracy is a majority rule situation. And we've been trained as Americans to think that's very good. And what I usually say to the kids is say, well, imagine this and tell me if this democratic principles were here. You've got 5 wolves and a lamb voting on what's going to be dinner. Okay? So that's going to be lamb for dinner because there's 5 wolves and 1 lamb. So they wanted something that would have democratic principles used to choose a representative government with restrictions put on it. And so when they're thinking about how do we want the chief executive who's supposed to run this new country, and that's what it is, it's a new country. You didn't have a United States of America when the revolution ends. It's the ratification of the Constitution that creates a new country called the United States of America. It's something we have to remember, that the Revolutionary War had been a war versus England's monarchy, versus the nobility, versus, divine right of kings. And we're saying, no, we want these 13 independent republics. Your country you were fighting for in a revolution was South Carolina or Massachusetts or Virginia. It was not, you had a small congregated little continental Congress that became a Congress that was set up under the Articles of Confederation, but it wasn't a separate country. In fact, that was very frustrating after the revolution was won. For instance, George Washington was trying to enter into a business with a lot of their people to set up a canal that would go through the Chesapeake and would go into Maryland and maybe go all the way up to a bit of Pennsylvania. And they couldn't get it done because all these states were arguing with each other. Once you get a country, then that's now federal lands and you can get deals like that done. Okay. So these 13 little republics who still have a lot of regional distrust, that's a serious problem, have said, we're going to have a new country, and that means we're going to need a chief executive. And how are we going to choose that chief executive? Now, they didn't worry about the things that we worry about today when we think, well, if a president gets elected, he may have these kind of ideas, or he may want this kind of policy. In those days, everything was expected, for the most part, was going to be a power in Congress. If you look at the way the Constitution is set up, Article 1 is the first article. And it's got 10 different parts to it. It's all about Congress. The farther you get along, the more broad the articles get. So Article 2 says something, well, the president can do this, he can pardon, he's the commander-in-chief, he signs laws, but it kind of leaves a lot of it for the people to figure out. And by the time you get to Article 3 of the judiciary, most of it's not about the judiciary. You get the first article about there's a Supreme Court and any other courts that the Congress decides to set up. Okay, so most of the powers were expected to reside in Congress, the people's representatives. They're the closest to the people. That's where we think most of the power is going to be. So they were less concerned about powers taken by the president. So Article 2 says the chief executive, and Americans are naturally suspicious of centralized power. We are still that way. When you look at the two parties, when you look at the way things have gone throughout our history, a lot of it has been about how powerful should the federal government need to be. During the Great Depression, we wanted a federal government that could set up all these New Deal programs to get unemployment going. During World War II, we need a government that can put together a war industry and a president that can direct things. But a lot of the other times we're saying, now that we don't have those kind of problems, we like home rule. We like our state making our own decisions. So when you're suspicious of centralized power, you want a situation where the states are going to be the one who are going to set up this federal government and choose this chief executive. And remember, it's a national, not a national government, it's a federal government, which means when the Constitution was agreed to, everybody's got their own areas of power. Congress, they're all the powers that they have. President, here are the powers they have. The judiciary is supposed to go, we're the referee. You know, they'll throw a flag, 15-yard penalty if you go against the Constitution. That's their job to do that. So it's really important to understand that they made a very specific decision to have a federal government, and that in the end, the people who are going to choose this are going to be the people in those states. Once those states have made that choice, those voters are the ones who are calling the call. And why is that? Because they're the property owners. Originally, the Declaration of Independence was life, liberty, and property. Jefferson thought better, but said, that sounds a little crazy. So pursuit of happiness for people at that time is the same as property. Your pursuit of happiness can mean I have my own farm, I have my own land, I have my own business, I have a little shop, whatever it is. And those property owners are the ones who decide what's going to happen at a vote. Why? Because they also pay the taxes. Okay, so if you're a property owner, that means you get a lot of the benefit of what's going to happen. It also means you're financing it. Okay, and so who is the president going to answer to? He's answering to these states who are making the decision. If I'm Virginia, I want to make sure that my tobacco farm is going to be protected. If I'm Massachusetts, I want to be able to make sure that I can put together my sailing business and I'll be able to build boats. And if I'm going to pay taxes, that should go to help the Boston Harbor or whatever it happens to be. So those are the ideas. Now, when we started talking about how we can elect a president and have him chosen by the states, the idea was we want to make sure there's some way, if something kind of gets out of hand, you've got people who are there to make a judicious decision. And so that's why we have the electors that we have in the Electoral College. Now, in the beginning, when you had these electors, they said, this may be a little trial and error. And if we need to change it, we're going to. That's why they have two kinds of amendments processes in the Constitution. The one that most of us are used to is each House of Congress has to pass by 2/3 any change to the Constitution. Then 3/4 of the states at that time have to ratify it. So today, it would have to be 2/3 of each Senate and the House, and 38 states would have to ratify it. And the other process is having a constitutional convention of states. And that's one thing a lot of people are talking about right now, is having a constitutional convention of states. The idea behind that, 2/3 of each house are never going to vote for term limits on Congress people. So if the American people want that to be in the Constitution, that's the kind of thing you're going to need to have a convention of states for. And people say, well, what if some crazy thing comes out of that? Then you still have to have 38 states ratify it. How many things can 38 states agree on today? And that was smart. 3/4 of the states means it has to be a really good idea that everyone thinks is a really good idea, or else it will not become part of the Constitution. So my feeling is that we should have a convention of states. Balanced budget amendment is one of the things that they debate. Term limits for congressmen is something they debate. Those two are two things that Congress will probably never vote for by 2/3, because that removes some power from Congress. And right now, the people feel maybe we should have some removal of power from Congress. So you've got these two methods, okay? Now, in the beginning, we had some changes that were made. We had 12 amendments in the first 15 years after the Constitution was ratified. But We've only had 15 in the next 230 odd years since then. So it's become harder and harder to change the Constitution because for the most part, we haven't come across many ideas that everyone by 3/4 of the state say, yeah, that's a good idea. Anybody remember what the last amendment to the Constitution is? Last amendment to the Constitution is actually one of the first amendments that were proposed. The 27th Amendment was first proposed with the 12 amendments that were proposed that eventually 10 of which were ratified and became what we call the Bill of Rights. The 11th eventually got done by passing a law rather than an amendment. The one that became the 27th Amendment was ratified in 1993 finally, after it had been first proposed in the 1790s, was one that says, if Congress votes themselves a pay raise, they don't get it until after the next election, which means we have to rehire them before they get their pay raise, which everyone looked at and says, well, that one makes sense. So when people found out about it and that it was still good, and it got ratified in 1993. Thank you, Michigan, for being the 38th state to ratify that. All right, so several of these amendments did have to do with the president. Some of them are very famous, and ones that we actually talk about. Lately, we've heard a lot of talk about the 25th Amendment, which is the one that says, hey, if the president seems to have problems, or if the majority of his cabinet says that he's not competent, or he's ill, or something's going on, then the cabinet can, by signing a letter, say the president is going to have to step down, and the vice president will step in and be the acting president until the next intervening election. We also have an amendment that limited the president to only 2 terms. Okay, it used to be we automatically did that. Everybody said 2 terms was enough for Washington. That should be enough for any president. But after Franklin Roosevelt, very soon after Franklin Roosevelt, they did pass an amendment to the Constitution that said only 2 terms. I was showing something to my kids the other day where the high school class is talking about the Cold War and particularly Soviet presidents. And Khrushchev visited the United States, and he was visiting when Eisenhower was there. And Khrushchev says to Eisenhower, why don't you run for a 3rd term? You're very popular. I'm sure you get elected. And Eisenhower says to him, he says, well, no, our Constitution now limits each president to only 2 terms. And Khrushchev says, well, you can just have him change that. Or something. He didn't really understand the concept, in a world where, if all of a sudden all your buddies decide that you're stepping down, which is what happened to Khrushchev, then you leave the office. But ours is a different system. All right, so the things like term limits, secession, things like that are things that we've done by amendment. All right, now one thing most Americans are not aware of, that we all think that for all our time that we've been voting that we had the secret ballot. Wrong. It wasn't a secret ballot. It was a very public voting procedure. In fact, this is called the county election. I think it's Bingham that did that painting, but it's always been one of my favorites because it's a town election going on there. And this is the way it happened. You went to your local seat of government, your town, your county, head or whatever it was. And then those that could vote, and everybody knew who the voters were because they owned property. This is until, basically this begins to change around Andrew Jackson's time. In fact, that's why Andrew Jackson was able to become president, because non-property owners were allowed to vote. Anyway, those who could vote would answer to each candidate's name. So they would say, those for Andrew Jackson, and people would raise their hand or they'd say aye or whatever, and they'd count them up and they'd tally, and that's how the voting was done in those days. Who's for so-and-so. And that's how the slate of electors would eventually get chosen, because a lot of it's up to each state in the Constitution how to allocate those electors. They can use any system they want to. And in the beginning, there wasn't any voting. It was the state legislature that say, yeah, we want Washington, so our 13 electoral votes will go for Washington. And that's what the legislature decided, because that is up to that state to decide how to do that. Many of you are aware of what's been going on in Nebraska lately. Okay, so Nebraska is one of 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, that allocate their electoral votes by, you get 2 electoral votes for winning the state, and then you get an electoral vote for each congressional district you win. In the last one in 2020, in 2016, Trump won all 5 votes in Nebraska, but in 2020, the Omaha district, which is largely urban, was won by Biden. So he got 1 of the 5 Nebraska electoral votes. Now they're trying to decide, do we want to keep doing it that way, or do we want to make it winner take all, like 48 of the states? Maine says they're leaving as it is, which sounds like Maine. Maine likes marching their own tune, so they're going to keep it as it is. So it's up to each state to decide how to parcel out those electoral votes. This is also why there were no Southern votes for Lincoln in 1860. Two reasons. Number one, no one was willing to stand up there and say, I'm voting for Abraham Lincoln. That's a way to make sure that you're a permanent pariah in your county there, okay? The second thing is, when you're actually voting, you say, or you mark on the ballot, you're voting for Abraham Lincoln or whoever it is, but you're actually voting for the elector slate that that candidate has put forward. So for instance, when you go to vote in Missouri this fall, it looks like it's going to be Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump again, then you'll either be voting for a slate of electors that will vote for Trump in Jefferson City in December, which is usually when it happens, around the 13th to the 17th, depending on what day it falls in there. And then there'll be a slate of electors for Mr. Biden. So depending on who wins that state, those are the electors that will get chosen by that process. And it's Missouri that has set up that process. And most of the other states use the same process, okay? So people later chosen by the candidates to be electors, it was a way for the public to be able to say, you know, this is who I'm for, I want to be an elector for so-and-so, and then on the day when the electors meet, they all meet, and usually in the state capitol, and they cast their ballots as electors. And then that state's votes are counted that way. Now, how do we know the day of the election, or at least we used to know on the day of the election, who has won? Because we already know who won that state. So that told us right away whose electors were going to be voting in the state capitol on the day when the Electoral College meets and votes. Now, as I said, the first time was easy. It was unanimous for Washington, and we'll never see that again, will we? But, you know, that makes a lot of sense. And as I said, the Constitution said it's up to the states to decide how to align those electors. And this is originally where I was going to talk about Nebraska in here. We've already covered that. Some didn't have voting at all on a personal level. In other words, there's a lot of people who just didn't even have the opportunity to cast their ballots. If you didn't own property, you didn't have a chance to cast your ballot. In South Carolina and one other southern state, they just didn't have an election. We know it's going to be Washington, and the state. We've decided in the state legislature we know best. And if we didn't know best, if the people didn't like it, then you're not going to get elected and sent back to the legislature. That's the way they figured. Those were the representatives. They know best. We sent them to the legislature in South Carolina. They'll vote the right way. And if you don't like the way they vote, you'll elect somebody else to the South Carolina legislature. So the legislatures chose the electors who voted on that designated day. Now, second place was different in those days. Okay, when it first started, each elector had 2 votes. And so a lot of them would say, well, okay, Washington is the obvious choice for the first one. And some of them would vote for Mr. Pinckney, who was a South Carolinian, if you were down south, or some of them would vote for somebody else. Up in the Northeast, they all voted for John Adams. So twice, when Washington was elected president, John Adams got the second most number of votes, and so he was vice president, okay? Now, that's going to be a problem later on. In 1796, the first time, Washington's done, he's retired, he's back at Mount Vernon. So now Adams says, I want to run for president, and he's under what's known as the Federalist Party. These are the guys who are in support of the Constitution being ratified. Those who had questions about it, but in the end supported it, were known as Democratic Republicans, and their candidate of choice was Thomas Jefferson. It's the first truly competitive presidential race in America's history, and it was very close, as you can see there. It was, I'm looking at right now, it was 71 to 68, okay? Adams wins. Now, this was a disagreement over policy. It wasn't just 2 people. Adams was much more in favor of a stronger central government. He was wanting to take a stronger action in foreign affairs. The French Revolution had just happened during this period of time, and the most powerful man in Adams' government was Alexander Hamilton, who was pro-British and anti-French, whereas Thomas Jefferson, a former ambassador to France, was pro-French and anti-British. His British cavalry that had chased down his wife not long after his last child was born, and she died fleeing the British. So he had no love lost for the British. So this was about policy versus these 2 powers. And for Adams also, it was about power in that District of Columbia. Already you started to have a group who said, hey, this is working really well for us. Now, they aren't actually in DC at this point. They're still in Philadelphia, finishing the 10-year period before DC officially opens. In fact, John Adams is the first man to sleep in what we know as the White House. At that time, it was known as the Executive Mansion. Okay? Now, Jefferson is a states' rights guy, which gives all kinds of impressions these days. From his standpoint, one of the greatest things he fears is this concentration of power in this capital. To him, that's, smacks of the king and parliament and all the things that they fought the revolution for. So Jefferson and Madison both wrote, Ghost wrote 2 resolutions that were put together at that time saying that we think that each state has the right to nullify any federal law that they don't like. Think about it, if you tried to do that today, the Supreme Court would knock down. Texas has tried it a couple times. Arizona's tried it because of the border issue. And the Supreme Court saying, no, we're reading the Constitution. That's a power that the federal government through the Congress has. So no, you can't do that. Anyway, Jefferson became known as a states' rights guy. So when this election happens and Adams wins, Jefferson spends almost his entire vice presidency back in Virginia at Monticello. So he's really not involved at all. And a lot of his time is spent getting ready to run again and beat Adams the next time. Now, again, this is one of those things when you think about it, these are guys who were fellow patriots. They both worked on getting France to help us in the Revolutionary War. Adams in particular was involved in raising money in Holland, and he was our first ambassador to Britain. And, these are the patriots we think about. And these guys are at each other like, a fight going on here. So I call this the nastiest election. Every once in a while, people say, oh, this was a really dirty election. I said, can't match the election of 1800 between Jefferson and Adams. At that time, parties owned newspapers. You knew when you bought that newspaper who they were in favor of. This is a Federalist paper. This is a Democratic Republican paper. And they admitted who they were for. There was no question that they weren't trying to be fair and balanced. They were trying to get their guy elected and didn't mind who they dragged in the mud. My favorite is Adams' paper, not Adams himself, but the newspaper supporting him, was the first one to accuse Thomas Jefferson of having sired a child by his slave, Sally Hemings, which I guess they're kind of at a point right now where the DNA evidence kind of looks like it's favoring that as reality, but we still don't know it to this day. But they were the first one to bring that up, figuring that might hurt him down south. The Democratic Republicans were saying that John Adams was a hermaphrodite. And I think a lot of the idea behind this was people say, gee, maybe it's true. I mean, it was in the newspaper, just like we do. It was on TV. I used to love Wag the Dog because I say, it's over. I know. I just saw it on TV. That's the truth. So this led to a very nasty election. And in the end, the Democratic Republican Party won the presidency. But who won it? And here's why. They ended up with an electoral college tie. Remember, you get 2 votes. And what was supposed to happen is one of the person who obviously didn't get the memo was supposed to vote for one other person so that Jefferson would get the most number of votes among the Democratic Republicans by at least 1. But it didn't happen. So when the votes are counted, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr have exactly the same number of electoral votes. They ended up in a tie. Now what do? Well, according to the Constitution, look at what goes on. Oh, we take it to the House of Representatives. And in the House of Representatives, it took 36 ballots before finally somebody got a deal made to change their vote from Burr to Jefferson on the 37th ballot, and Thomas Jefferson was elected. And then, as it is supposed to be in the Constitution at this point in time, Burr is his VP, okay? Who was very, I was robbed. That's the kind of, he didn't say that, but that's the kind of attitude they had. And so that's how you get the unusual situation when in 1804, the Vice President of the United States shoots and kills the former Secretary of the Treasury. Think about if that happened today, what a big news item that would have been. But that's what happened when Burr shot Alexander Hamilton in a duel in 1804. He was the sitting vice president, and Hamilton had been the former Secretary of the Treasury. All right. Obviously, this is not a working system to have these 2 votes on each side. So here we go. Amendment to the Constitution. The 12th Amendment to the Constitution is passed by both houses of Congress and ratified by a sufficient number of states so that it becomes part of the Constitution. And now we think we got the problem solved. Each elector will have 1 vote for a person for president and 1 vote for a person for vice president. So we won't have this competing situation anymore. However, one of the things they wanted to make sure is there's a lot of different ways they try to make sure that knowing the disparate items and the regional nature of the country, even then, it's obviously going to get a lot more as we begin to head west. They wanted to make sure that they didn't concentrate power in any one area. So one of the parts of the 12th Amendment, and every time I see somebody online, I start typing this in, I say, you don't know the 12th Amendment. Because the 12th Amendment says, if you vote for a person for president and vice president who are from the same state, if you're a member of that state and you vote for both of them from that state, your state's electoral votes cannot count for the winner. Okay? So that is why, unless they do something to change that, and there's only really one person probably can do anything to change that, that is why there's not probably going to be a Trump DeSantis or a Trump Rubio ticket, because Florida's votes would not be allowed to count as being won by Mr. Trump and his running mate. Now, if they want to do that, there's an easy fix. My understanding is Mr. Trump owns a few properties around the country. And so he could change his location and say, oh, I'm now from New York, or I'm now from wherever it is that, Las Vegas, or what happens to. So he would have to change that. Obviously, the governor of Florida might have a hard time with that one, and so might the senator from Florida. But whenever I have people say, and I'm not saying that politically, I'm just saying the 12th Amendment says that Florida's votes would not be part of it, and they need Florida's votes. This is not Nevada. You need to have Florida's votes. So, what's supposed to happen now in the House is you vote on the president first. This is what happened, and it's happened a couple of times here. We'll get into another situation what happened. Now, if there's nobody who gets the majority in that, only the top 3 people who received electoral votes can go on to this House of Representatives fight. And we'll talk about that. It's going to be important. It's going to play a part in one of our elections in a little bit. So the top 3 go to the House, and you try to get somebody who's got a majority. And the House chooses the president, okay? But you vote by states. In other words, there's 430 people in the House. It's not 430 votes. Each state votes as one. So California and New York get 1 vote. Wyoming gets 1 vote. Florida gets 1 vote. South Dakota gets 1 vote. That's the way it is in the Constitution. We want to change it. Something might happen. We might say, maybe we're going to change the way we do that. But right now, that's the way it is. And if you can't get that done with the vice president, that goes on to the Senate. Okay? The Senate would choose the vice president in that kind of situation. So hopefully we won't have anything like that. But we will be talking about some of those in this presentation. All right. So Jefferson gets elected. Burr dodges a bullet, pardon the phrase, later on when he gets accused of treason. And because of the 3rd article to the Constitution, which says that in order to be convicted of treason, you have to be accused of the same act of treason by more than 1 witness. So when the governor of the territory of Louisiana testifies how Burr tried to carve a piece of Louisiana out and have his own little country, Chief Justice John Marshall has to acquit him because there's only 1 testifier of what he did, even though it was the territorial governor that he had conspired with. Okay, so we get a series of Virginians that come in now. The ticket to the presidency at this period of time in America's history is not like it is today. Today, in the last 100 years, we've had a number of vice presidents who, one way or another, either by secession through a passing or by running after their former boss, they get elected president too. In these days, the ticket to the presidency was the Secretary of State. Okay, so you had Thomas Jefferson, who had been Washington's Secretary of State. You had James Madison, who was Jefferson's Secretary of State. You had James Monroe, who was Madison's Secretary of State. Now you're going to have a Secretary of State which is going to kind of break this Virginian thing. And that's who's sitting right here. That is John Quincy Adams. He had been President Monroe's Secretary of State and probably one of the most qualified men to run for the office of President of the United States. He had negotiated the Treaty of Ghent, which ends the War of 1812. He had gotten Florida for free. This is one of my favorite stories. Maybe you remember when we talked about this. We owed the Spanish a bunch of money, okay? And we weren't, individuals were the people who owned it. American people owed the Spanish money. And they had Florida. And they go, we don't want it. It's full of alligators and mosquitoes. And so Adams said, tell you what, we'll make sure, we'll pay the money to you that these Americans owed if you give us Florida. And they said, sure, deal. So basically, we paid ourselves in order to get Florida. Pretty good deal. Florida's always been good with real estate, hasn't it? Anyway, and we call it the Monroe Doctrine, but it's really the John Quincy Adams Doctrine. It's John Quincy Adams that came up with the Monroe Doctrine. It was President Monroe who announced it, and it's got his name on it, as it well should. But anyway, this is John Quincy. He's one of my favorite guys in history that nobody knows much about. However, he's also involved in one of the most wild elections in American history. So, after the War of 1812, the Federalist Party, which had been Washington's party, which had been John Adams' party, has been in deep decline. And it gets finished off after the War of 1812 when everyone finds out that they had been secretly negotiating with the British about New England quitting the war. And that's all the Federalist Party was now. It was just a regional party. And so when that happens, everybody goes, wait a minute, you guys are collaborators. And so the Federalist Party dies after the election of 1820. So now what happens? We have what we call the era of good feelings, okay? It lasts about 2 years. It's about all any era of good feelings will last in politics. But anyway, all these presidents had served two terms except Washington. In 1824, we're going to have a new president. And we've only got one political party. But we don't have a way that those parties choose a nominee. That's coming, okay? So you have all these regions that say, well, we're going to nominate our guy to be our party's nominee, okay? So the Democratic-Republican Party in the Northeast nominates John Quincy Adams. The Democratic Party in the South nominates a guy named William Crawford from South Carolina. The Democratic Party from the Middle West, that's what what today we would consider southern Midwest, nominates Henry Clay of Kentucky. And then, of course, there's the hero of New Orleans, Andrew Jackson from Tennessee. So those are the four guys that are all running, even though we've only got one political party, at least in theory. It's regional, but there's only one political party. So that's about as bad as you can imagine it's going to be. It's going to be a mess. No one is going to win a majority in the election in the Electoral College that year. And look at those colors. You don't even have to know the number to know that the whole thing is a mess. You got pink New England up there. That's John Quincy Adams territory. You got the green South in some areas and the blue South in some other areas. And then you've got a little bit of mismatch of everything. Now, one thing that does help out, and that is that Jackson has the most electoral votes. He has the most, what we would call popular vote. And John Quincy Adams is second. But according, again, to the Constitution, only three can move on. Now, Crawford is out. He's fourth. And also, he's sick. So he's not running anyway. So who's it going to be? It's going to be Jackson or John Quincy Adams or Clay. And as the votes go on, it's clear that Clay is never going to get there. It's really going to be between John Quincy Adams and Jackson. Now, remember, Clay's from Kentucky, bordering state to Andrew Jackson's Tennessee. What does Andrew Jackson expect? That Clay will tell his people to support Jackson and elect him president of the United States. That's not what happens. Clay tells his people to support John Quincy Adams. And then John Quincy Adams makes Clay his Secretary of State, which is considered the pathway to the presidency for the next time. And so when that happens, That's when Jackson's folks says a corrupt bargain has been struck between Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams. Okay, Henry Clay will run twice more for president, never gets elected. He's probably one of the most well-known congressmen all during the first half of the 19th century, runs a couple of times, and I am convinced that the number one thing that kept him from ever being elected president is a lot of people believe there was a corrupt bargain struck. Now, anybody knows John Quincy Adams, he wouldn't do something like that. He's about as straight arrow as they come, but it sure looked bad. So Jackson decides he's going to spend the next 4 years getting his revenge. At every opportunity he can, all the people in Congress who support Jackson are undermining John Quincy Adams. Nothing gets done during his presidency. Jackson ends up winning big when he runs against John Quincy Adams in 1828, and now is when the big change in American elections happens. Jackson wants to make sure that not only this never happens again, but that I have control over whoever's going to be president, even after I leave the White House when I'm finished with my presidency. So we're going to have party conventions. We're going to get together at those conventions. We're going to have nominees come forward. We're going to choose a nominee. That person is going to be the person who then is going to represent the party when the election comes up every 4 years. That's going to keep there from being any divisions. And Jackson rules the party until his death. Okay? And if you wanted to be the Democratic nominee, and he'd been out of the office for 10, 15 years, you had to go see Andrew Jackson and get his blessing. So for several decades, the nominees must kiss the ring of Andrew Jackson. And I put up a very famous cartoon that happened while he was presidency when people felt he was ruling. He has one foot on the Constitution. He's got a veto power. And he's the first president to veto things. And he vetoed things all the time. The Senate censured him. You know, they called him King Andrew I. Yes, he cried all the way to the ballot box. He won 2 big elections. So that's Andrew Jackson. And he shortened the name of the party from Democratic Republican to just Democrat or Democratic. You get arguments both ways. But that's when the party becomes known as the Democrat Party. So this big reform of nominating conventions is a big hit. The other parties do the same thing, and the opposition party is known as the Whig Party in those days. And what was the Whig Party famous for? I don't know, you may remember I have one of my former students over here. We always said the Whig Party was opposed to what the Democrats were doing. So if the Democrats said, up, the Whig Party said down. If they said black, they said white. So the Whig Party was a big opposition to the Democrat Party. Okay, now, hard to believe Americans loved politics in this time. Americans today, we don't like politics. Politics. Oh, I wish we didn't have to deal with politics. They loved it. Why? It's a big party. Look at these guys. They go to these conventions. They come from every little tiny town, whatever, and they'd go to these conventions, and they'd be there for days, and they'd party, and they'd meet people, and men went to meet women, and women went to meet men, and all that sort of stuff. So from the boonies to the cities, and went on for days and days. They loved them, and usually several ballots. That's the other thing. You hardly had anyone who'd win on the first, second, or third ballot. Abraham Lincoln, his nomination in 1860 took several ballots. And a lot of horse trading would go by. Okay, I'll vote for him, but what do I get out of it? Okay, you can be my secretary of whatever. Okay, all right, and then I'll tell my delegates to support this candidate. And that's the way it went. When Lincoln started in 1860, he was third. And after several ballots, of course, he ends up being the nominee. And a lot of complaining was going on by the other Republican guys. Oh, he made all these deals and stuff like that. We're grateful. All we know is we like the way it turned out. But that was typical in those days of what happened with these conventions. And the other thing you would trade is government jobs. Every town is required to have a post office. There was always jobs in your local post office. So people would often Lincoln spent about half of his day as president in the morning seeing people all day, mainly looking for a job. And if there was somebody that was a Republican or, somebody related to his family or something like that, they'd find a job for him. All right, now the Civil War is over, and we're going to see a very different map for a while here. This is the election that some have referred to as the crime of the century, the election of 1876. The Democrat nominee was from New York. His name was Samuel Tilden. He was a reform governor. And Republican Governor Rutherford Hayes was from Ohio, had been a general in the Union Army during the Civil War. When the dust settled after the election day, Tilden was 1 vote short of being elected president. But there were several states that still were in dispute. Louisiana, Oregon, Florida, and South Carolina. Now remember, this is also the time of Reconstruction. So in many of these states, particularly the 3 southern states you see there, they had not allowed the old Confederates to vote yet. So there was some question, which vote count do we have? The one where blacks were allowed to vote, and so the Republican one here, or the one where, we didn't allow blacks in this county or something like that to vote, and so the Democrat would win there. So what do? What does Congressorials do? They set up a committee, and the committee was made up of 8 Republicans, 7 Democrats. I wonder how they were going to vote on that one. So voting on a straight party line, just a few days before the inauguration, the committee voted to award all those disputed electoral votes to Rutherford B. Hayes, who won the election by 1 electoral vote. Behind the scenes, the secret deal said the Southerners will get patronage back, a lot of the old Confederates will get their voting rights back, and the military will pull out of the South, which would end Reconstruction. So basically, the freedmen were abandoned by the political deal that was made in order to win the election in 1876. And that was the end of Reconstruction, and that was the beginning of the Jim Crow era of the South, is because of this election that happened in 1876. Poor Mr. Hayes had nothing to do with all this, and just was sworn in, and all the newspapers, all the Democrat newspapers, he referred to as his fraudulency or Rutherford B. Hayes. And it's kind of sad because he was really a good guy, but because of the nature of how he became president, he never heard the end of that. He served his 1 term and then he was out of there after that. All right. Our next election that I want to talk about, especially in the wake of all the brouhaha about what happened in 2020 in this country, is the election of 1888. And I put at the top of the slide, did the Civil War ever end? Because look at that map. Can you tell where the old Confederacy was and where the Union states were that fought in the Civil War? With a few exceptions in there, mainly, in fact, Maryland never seceded, but only because Lincoln put the Maryland legislature in jail when they were going to vote for secession. You got Delaware and then Connecticut, New Jersey, but for the most part, it looks like the Civil War map. And you're not going to see that South with any red in there for almost a century, okay? So what's happening in 1888? In this point in time, the issue was tariffs. The Republicans wanted tariffs. They wanted to protect new businesses that are being formed all over the North because of the mechanization, because of the Industrial Revolution. Whereas the South looks at that and says, we don't have manufacturing down here. We just know tariffs are going to make everything more expensive for our people in the South. So the Democratic Party was against tariffs. The Republican Party was for tariffs. Okay, and the voting in U.S. in a lot of places is still public. The secret ballot has not been widely accepted through the country. So you would know how your friends were voting in a time like this. The ballots in some of these states were passed out by the handful, and oftentimes they would hand them out in colors. So that if you paid somebody to vote Republican or to vote Democrat, you knew whether they had done what you paid them for by what color ballot they put in the box if they were doing a paper ballot as opposed to a spoken ballot. And we had a lot of that going on. There are 3 different things that they talk about during this election: floaters, colonizers, and repeaters. Repeaters are what you think they are. They're people that voted more than once. My dad used to always have a joke on election day. He'd say, remember, vote early and vote often. Okay. The colonizers is guys who would leave one state and go to a state where their party's voters would need it. And that happened a lot of times. And then the floaters are ones who would vote in one place and then they'd go to another town and they vote in another place because there's no way to track these people. And if they say, well, where are you from? Oh, I live in this farm that's way out by such and such. Oh, okay, go ahead and sign your name and vote and all that sort of thing. So a lot of that happened in the 1888 election. And Grover Cleveland was running for re-election on the tariff issue and lost largely because of the floaters, colonizers, and repeaters. So there was massive fraud in that one. And in particular, there was a senator who got in trouble because it was known that he had put a lot of money into Indiana. I think Pennsylvania was the other one. He put a lot of money to funding some of these things that were going on. And he got censured, but he did not get kicked out of the Senate because most of the other guys in the Senate were the same party, so they didn't want to kick him out of there. This led to a public outcry, and as a result of this election, this is when people started saying, it's time for us to adopt what's called the Australian ballot. We know it as the secret ballot. It was called the Australian ballot because it first got used a lot in a place called New South Wales, which is a section of Australia. And so when we heard about that, we said, well, that makes sense. In the beginning, you wrote things and you fold it in half, that sort of thing. I remember when I was growing up, I went in with my mom one time when I was little, and she had, pushed the little levers around that, so the machine voting that we did eventually. So all of this was secret ballot. All right. Now I'm going to move forward in time a little bit. How many of you know who that is that's on that picture there? No, it's not. That's a good guess. That's Daley. That is Mayor Richard J. Daley at the 1968 Democratic Convention. That's the one where we had the police riot. Now, before that, in 1960, one of the most famous suspected, shall we say, tampered with election was JFK's 1960 election. But even before the election, there had been some shenanigans going on during the primaries. And I wish I could find it again, but years ago I saw something on Truman, and Truman went to the 1960 convention, and at that convention, he was complaining about some of the interference going on at the convention. He says, there's one particular party that's doing this, and I'm not going to talk about who they are. And this is the Democrat Party. The Republicans can cheat all they want, but I don't like it in my party. And what he was talking about was Joe Kennedy, who was out there trying to buy influence in people at the convention to support his son. And in fact, one of Kennedy's girlfriends at the time, Judith Exner, years later, admitted that at one point in time she met him for a get-together, shall we say, during the West Virginia primary. And she was asked to carry a briefcase. And she was asked later on what was in the briefcase. It was cash, and it was in order to get some of the union bosses to have their unions support Kennedy in West Virginia, because West Virginia was very definitely a union state. So those kinds of things were going on. And then, of course, the famous thing is, did Mayor Daley do some shenanigans with the Chicago vote in order to help Kennedy win Illinois? And that's when we first had the thing about, well, the dead are voting in massive amounts, because what they knew who was there and who was not there, who was dead and who was alive, but they were still on the rolls. And so you could get in there and you could take ballots in the name of those people who are already gone and cast those ballots. And to this day, we have lots of suspicion, but we don't know for sure. Nixon did not challenge that election. He was advised to at one point in time, so you should challenge it. You certainly should have a canvass done of the Chicago vote. He knew he wanted to run again, and he knew Americans don't like a sore loser. So he didn't. And then he went on 2 years later, and my kids were just talking about this because we're talking about Nixon this week, when he lost in California, the governorship, and said, well, the press won't have Dick Nixon to kick around anymore. But of course, 6 years later, he did win the presidency. Anyway, in 1968, LBJ's surprise withdrawal from the nominating process threw the Democratic process into mass confusion, okay? So you had Robert F. Kennedy, who decided to run after that, after he found out that LBJ wasn't going to run. Eugene McCarthy had already made it close in New Hampshire when running against LBJ that January. So his withdrawal said, well, now how are we going to choose somebody? Because you had one candidate who was coming in, and the primaries were almost all over. Okay, that's Hubert Humphrey, Johnson's vice president. So in the end, the Democratic committee made the decision that they had superdelegates that could vote at the convention. And of course, I don't know if you remember, that's how that riot got going. When the word got out that the fix was in and Humphrey was going to be the nominee, and that meant that Robert Kennedy wasn't going to be the nominee because he'd been killed after the California primary. Sounds weird to say that, doesn't it? But anyway, what a year. So you had Humphrey there. McCarthy wasn't going to get enough support. Humphrey was really the only choice, but it was not by primary, ballot and not by the delegates. It was the super delegates who did that. So after that happened, they fixed it so that you had to win all these delegates in a primary system. And then in 1972, the Democrats were not so sure about that system because it ended up giving them George McGovern as their nominee, which meant that Richard Nixon won 49 out of 50 states. I tell my kids this stuff like this, and they just kind of look at me like that. Did this really happen? Yeah, this really happened. So from 1972 to basically 1992 is almost all by primaries. And then you had the superdelegates, which helped the Clintons get to the finish line in 1992. All right, 2000. One of our favorites, right? Bush versus Gore and the hanging chads. Now, that's a late night nail biter. And I know most of it, I'm looking here, most of you know what I'm talking about, remember this one happened, but there's little bits and pieces of it that have kind of got lost by the wayside. And HBO a number of years ago did a little movie called Recount. I said, okay, you're keeping these facts and forgetting about these facts. So let me go a little bit through that election and say why this election was even more unusual than how it looks on the face. Number one, I shouldn't say early in the, about 10 or 11 o'clock, they declare Florida for Gore. And the Republican Party calls up all the newscasts and say, wait, you can't do that. The polls aren't closed yet. Yeah, they are. No. The panhandle's in a different time zone, guys. So they said the panhandle's not closed. These people are waiting in line. They'll think it's over and they'll go home. No, you can't do that. So they waited and waited until the panhandle was closed. And then they said, too close to call, because the panhandle was and still is a largely Republican area. Okay, so they undeclared it for Gore. Then they said, no, it looks like Bush is going to win. Then the Gore people called and said, whoa, wait. They're still counting ballots in all these places, and it's really, really close. And that's the part that most people remember. At that point in time, they undeclared it. And Gore said, we need to count every vote. By the way, does anyone know who Gore's person who was working on the vote counting and wanted to make sure that every vote got counted when he was working for Gore's campaign was? Richie Daley, his son. Okay, little parts of American history that are just too fascinating. No, that can't be true. Yes, it was. It was Mayor Daley's son, Richie Daley. So anyway, all of this would have been moot had Gore not lost his home state of Tennessee. Nobody talks about that. The only reason Florida meant anything is because Gore lost Tennessee. Had he won Tennessee, Florida would have been icing on the cake if he'd won it. So when people say, well, the Supreme Court decided, no. Al Gore lost that election by not winning his home state. Okay? That's a big deal. So all the Supreme Court said, look, you've done all the counting. Florida has given us certification. There's no place for us to get involved in that. There's no reason for us to say, we tell you to keep counting. And actually, Alan Dershowitz is wrong about this. Sorry, I know he's the big law guy, but the fact of the matter is, there's a reason why the Constitution doesn't tell states how to count their votes. That is up to them, so that the federal government doesn't get involved in that and being accused of putting a thumb on the scale or something like that. All right, let's deal with it. The messy COVID election of 2020. What was the problem with the vote? Maybe years later we'll find out something else, but so far, while there have obviously been some discrepancies, the fact of the matter was, you got 81 million votes versus 75 million votes. I know we don't do this by popular vote, and you could say if this vote is shifted here, there's a lot of things like that. In the end, this election is not really about fraud and whether fraud happened. Fraud always happens. The question is, would it have been enough to change the election? And the real problem, if I'm the Republican Party and I'm looking at that and say, what lessons should I have learned from that? Is that this was all coming and people warned them, and that a number of states changed their election law without the proper procedure. Legislatures that were supposed to be involved were not involved. Governors just signed things. Governors that were supposed to be involved didn't get involved. The legislatures just changed things. So a number of key states changed their law. They extended the amount of time that ballots could be handed in. Some of them allowed ballots to be handed in 3 days after Election Day. So you shouldn't be surprised that there's a lot of confusion and accusations and inconsistency. That's really the problem of 2020. And the interesting thing about this whole thing, when I look back at it, is we all made fun of Florida in 2020 in 2000 because of the hanging chads and that picture I showed you the guy. But Florida counted millions of votes the night of the election in 2020 and reported at 10 o'clock, okay? They fixed it. And so if you really want to make sure that we have an election system that people have confidence in, then we need to press our states to fix their procedures before we have any argument about who's going to be the candidates. Just fix the process. I saw something recently, I think it's really true, and this is the way I think most Americans feel. Americans have always, we know who we want to win, we know who we vote for, but it's always been a peaceful process because in the end, we have confidence in the integrity of the process, and the losers accept that they lost. That's not who I voted for, but that's who the people voted for. I accept that. This is our system. It's when you think, that something funny is going on. And we shouldn't have that kind of feeling. I shouldn't feel like an Iraqi election because they put purple on their finger is run more cleanly than a United States, American election. And that's the problem we had. They had mail-in balloting problems. Like I said, some of these states had their own legislative process, or just courts just said, yes, we're going to allow the governor to change this here because of COVID. And that really shouldn't have happened there. All right. So an important reminder, and this is my last slide. I'm very proud of myself because it's 8 o'clock and I'm done here. And that is that reminder that we are not a democracy. I hear all this stuff on the TV. Oh, a threat to our democracy. Both sides are saying it's a threat to our democracy. Well, nicely said, but we are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. It's not a democracy. So it's not endangered. And if we have concerns about the process or we have concern that's endangered, then let's get off our fannies and do something about it. And this is all local. The solution is not Washington, D.C. The solution is in our state houses and our state legislatures. And we need to tell them, we want you to do what Florida did. And it was a joint thing. It was before, when Florida was still a swing state, and maybe it still is, we'll find out. When it was still a swing state, they said, look, that was embarrassing to our state. We've got millions of people here, and everyone laughed at us for a month and a half while we recounted ballots. And they got a system that really works. They have a long period of time where they have early voting, and then they count all those early votes first. Then they count all the votes that came in that day, and that's why at 10 o'clock, they had a result that everyone had confidence in, and everyone, stopped worrying about Florida and moved on. So it's not endangered. Our framers did not trust democracy because of the little illusion I made about the wolf and the lamb. It's about majority rule, but also minority rights. The minority have to feel that it's been a fair process, then they will accept that they were minority voters. And by minority, I mean the less amount of vote. And in the end, we will be happy about the choice of our executive. Maybe it's not who we wanted, but the process was clean. Urban voting has made some of this more difficult in that you've got a lot of these urban areas where they have so many people new coming in. You have so much difference in new populations, and you've got people that don't know how a system should work. And so that's probably one of the areas we're going to have to focus on. People aren't worried about people shooting out in the middle of, in the suburbs or on the boonies. They're worried about in the cities where there's a lot of change going on and who's being allowed to vote. It should be citizens only. But again, this is something people should insist on from their elected officials. And this new concentration of population is going to be a challenge, but we can handle that. And at this point in time, I am happy to take any questions that you have. Yeah.
You didn't address this, and it's probably a big subject, but it would seem as though the way the system is set up, it discourages the creation of other parties.
Okay. That's an excellent question. And the question being asked is, the way our system's set up, is it discouraging of other parties? This, again, is an artifact of our creation in that when you have 50 states that are now part of this union, we started at 13, now we have 50, each party has to have representations and be able to get on the ballot in those states. You say, well, shouldn't we have a national law mix it? No, we can't do that. Our election laws are local. So what that requires is going to require people who want a party or a candidate to be on the ballot to be working either over time or certainly well in advance of an election to get other people on. For instance, let's use an obvious example that we all see right before us, and that's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So he has really, his number one choice would to say, have the Libertarian Party say he's our candidate. The Libertarian Party has been around enough in this country, I think all 50 states have a slate for a Libertarian Party candidate. It's usually somebody that nobody's ever heard of, and to some extent the Libertarian Party suffered from the fact that there was a period of time when they were all about us, we want to have prostitution, you should be able to, you want to take drugs, you should be able to, and that's the way a lot of Americans, rightly or wrongly, saw the Libertarian Party. But it's because you have to get on the ballot of 50 states. Republicans and Democrats have been on the ballot in 50 states since Abraham Lincoln. So they've had plenty of time to make sure all 50 states, and when we added Alaska and Hawaii in 1959, bam, right away, those got added to those states. So that's really the challenge, is getting on all 50 states. Because if you don't, you can't get an electoral college vote. You could get 100% of the votes in New York and California, and it still wouldn't give you anything close to an electoral college victory. That's the number one challenge with a third party. It's almost always been two parties. It was Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. It was Democratic Republican and the Whigs. Whig Party fell apart as Democratic and the Republican Party. And that's the way it's been since the Civil War. Think about that. We have not had anyone outside of those parties I just named who has won the presidency. The closest as far as number of votes was Perot, who got 19% in 1992. But nobody talks about the fact he didn't win a single state. Whereas, this is why I told that story about going to that Wallace protest, because in 1968, he won some southern states. He got electoral votes. It wasn't going to be enough to do anything. It was southern states that had 7 or 8 or 9 votes or something like that, but he won electoral votes. He's the last third-party candidate to win electoral votes. Okay. Yeah.
They elect the electors, and they're supposed to vote in their particular party.
Right.
Is there any way they can decide not to?
Yes.
And also, when did the superdelegates get
Yeah. Okay. We still have that happen once in a while. They're called faithless electors. That's a term. It really, no one's holding their feet to the fire saying you have to vote for the guy that you were elected to represent. You can choose to vote, just don't expect to ever have any business in that party's political structure again. He voted in Liberty. Well, I don't care if it was already decided. That's kind of like thumbing your nose at the people who agreed to have you be an elector to represent that candidate or represent that party. But we've had that happen a number of times. I think the last time that happened, we had, I think we had some in maybe 2012 or something like that. We had 1 or 2. Every once in a while, you'll get 1 or 2, just say, the heck with it. I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen. Because some people don't like either one of the choices, so you might say, well, but not if it's like 1 or 2 votes different. If somebody wins by 20 or 30, you might have 1 or 2 faithless electors. They're allowed to do that. They're allowed to do that. The question was about that we have some people who don't vote the slate that they were chosen to vote in favor of, and yes, that happens. Any other questions? Yeah.
There's a state process or election that's new. I think Alaska used it the last time.
Oh.
Can you explain that
Yeah.
process?
Yeah. It's called ranked choice voting. Yeah, I'm sorry. The question is about, explain about, and this happened in Alaska, what ranked choice voting is. This is hard to explain, but I'll do my best at it, because even when somebody explained it to me, I said, I'm not sure I quite get that. I'm going to be very general. And you're right, Alaska is where it last happened. And it was important to happen in Alaska because Lisa Murkowski, who is officially an independent, a former Republican, a close friend of Mitch McConnell's, was running against a Democratic nominee for her seat in the Senate and a Republican nominee, and she ended up winning. And it was largely because of what's called ranked choice voting. And that is, you go in there and you can vote, somebody is your first choice, somebody is your second choice, and somebody is your third choice. And I don't know exactly the algorithm, but the algorithm is that eventually, if there's not a majority of people that vote, that get 50% of first choice, then the second and third choices do add somewhat to the total so that you will get to a point in time where someone's got enough of a majority that they get elected. And that's how she got elected last time. was through this ranked choice voting. And I think, from what I understand, the person I asked about this said it's different in every state how they decide to do it. In Alaska, it was real simple. It was the independent, Murkowski, and then it was a Republican and Democrat. I don't know if, a fourth party would get involved. She's not really a member of a party officially. She caucuses with the Republicans. It will be interesting to see what she decides to do when Mitch McConnell is no longer the Republican in the Senate leader when he steps down in January of next year. But they're trying to do that, I understand, in some other states, and California's talked about it. You also have states like California that have gone what's basically a jungle primary. And what that means is that, let's say you have 8 people who are running, and it might be 5 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And in the end, the top 2, no matter, unless somebody gets over 50%, which in that kind of thing they usually don't, then the top 2 run off. And in California, it's almost always been a Democrat running off against a Democrat. So just which Democrat's going to win the Senate seat in California. Although this may be interesting this time because former first base Hall of Famer Steve Garvey, former Los Angeles Dodger, is running for the Republicans. And there's some thought that he might end up second, which would mean you would actually have a Republican candidate running against a Democrat candidate in the general. So that would be interesting, but there's no guarantee in polling. I would say at this point in time, I would say this: be very careful of polling going forward, because cell phones have killed a lot of the polling business. You used to call a landline, and you knew you were getting the right house or whatever, and you knew something about that family. Now it's there's fewer and fewer landlines. It's harder and harder to get responses. Sometimes they have to call 1,000 people before they get one response. That's very expensive. So polling has gotten to the point in time where it's hard to judge how accurate that polling is. And that's why you'll see things like, what's that called? Real Clear Politics does this polling that they take all the 8 or 10 top well-respected polls, averages them together, and puts a thing out there. Now, it doesn't mean it's accurate. In fact, for the most part, it's probably not. But what it does reflect over time is direction, movement. So if you see, maybe it's a 2-point spread and maybe it's a 3-point spread or maybe it's a 4-point spread, then you're probably seeing some movement. But the numbers are less likely to be accurate than it will end up being when the election comes. Yeah. They haven't chosen them yet. I think there's a few who have said, okay, yeah, the question is, who's Mitch McConnell's replacement going to be? I think Mitch McConnell will have something to say about that. You don't get elected Republican leader as long as he has, if you don't still have a lot of juice with the people who are there. What's interesting is, as time goes on, especially with the Senate, which is almost like, the realm of Social Security there, you get more and more of these guys that are getting their 70s and their 80s and they're retiring. And the new guys that come up, they feel very differently about Leader McConnell than the guys who have been there 10, 15, 20 years. And the other thing is that what's made McConnell so influential and powerful is that you have the Supreme Court you have today because of Mitch McConnell. Now, plus minus, whether you like that or not, his decision that we're not going to have a vote on a guy in the Supreme Court during an election year in 2016, which looked like, well, that doesn't make any difference. Hillary Clinton will pick that person, and in next year in 2017, that didn't happen. And then deciding that, yeah, we are going to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with a nominee by President Trump, that year. Yeah, that Supreme Court is the way it is because of Mitch McConnell. Like I said, whether you like him or not, and I think he's very proud of his legacy and the number of judges he got confirmed. Brett Kavanaugh going through, there's no question that Mitch McConnell said, no, we're going to have a vote and we're going to hold people's feet to the fire. And so I think the guy from Tennessee, not Marsha Blackburn, but the other guy, I think is one. Some people have said Ted Cruz should. I think he's already said he's not going to. There's a lot of people say, well, put somebody in there like Rand Paul. The problem with someone like Rand Paul, you may like him, but nobody, you have to have people who have, I've helped you, you've helped me, now I want to be Senate leader, I need your vote. That's the reality of any position in authority with people. And so that's going to be really interesting to see who, and of course the next question is, will that next person be the Senate Majority Leader? And right now, the odds are in favor of that. With Joe Manchin retiring, that's going to be a Republican seat. The guy is running there just, last time he ran for election, he won by like 25 points, Jim Justice. So he's probably going to be the next senator from West Virginia. You've got polling that shows that there's a seat in Montana that's up for grabs. There's a couple of seats that may flip. And if that happens, then you're going to have a Republican Senate, and you're going to have whoever that person is, the new Republican leader, is going to have a lot of power, because they're going to be in a position to, remember, every appointment the president makes has to be approved by the Senate, okay? Whether it's a judge, whether it's a cabinet member, all these people have to be approved by the Senate. So if you have a Republican Senate and you get a Republican president, it'll be very different. If you have Mr. Biden gets reelected and you have a Republican Senate, he's not going to get a lot of his judges approved. And that'll be a big deal too. So these little things that most of the public is blissfully unaware of, and I understand that, could be a big deal after this coming election here. Yeah.
What are those numbers?
Oh, those are the electoral college numbers. The number of electoral votes each of those has. So Florida's got 29. I think they're now third. Yeah, they're tied with New York.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
In like Nebraska, number 5.
Yeah, it's got a 1, 2, and 3, which means that the congressional districts there. So, if Nebraska sticks with this, and I'm not sure they're not going to revisit this. I think they're probably going to revisit it. I don't know, we'll see. The people I trust are saying, I think eventually they're going to make it winner take all. See, what happens when you don't have winner take all? Let me give you an example. Well, it's more than that. Money. There will be a ton of campaigning for the 4 votes in New Hampshire. Now, if they did a congressional district, you wouldn't campaign a lot of time there if you maybe win one more electoral vote than if they didn't do, if you didn't win the state. But if it's winner take all, you get those 4 votes, your opponent gets 0, okay? So these states like Maine and Nebraska are never going to have political candidates, presidential candidates, spend much time campaigning in those states. They won't spend a lot of money buying ads in those states. And they've begun to figure that out, because some of these TV stations and newspapers are surviving every 4 years on the money that political parties spend come campaign time. And so, St. Louis, Missouri used to be a swing state. Okay, anybody know when Missouri stopped being a swing state? John McCain won it by like 3,500 votes in 2008. That was the last time that Missouri was a swing state. Ever since that, it's been a pretty red state. But until then, they usually were a bellwether. If the Democrat won, Missouri went that way. If a Republican won, Missouri went that way. And that's been changed ever since, basically, since the 2008 campaign. But, those states are missing out on a lot of money. I think they've begun to figure that out. And you may say, well, that's a terrible reason. Yeah, it may be a terrible reason, but it's also reality. The reality is that a lot of things are motivated by the fact that there's a lot of people's jobs who will be saved by money coming into that state. There's a lot of people that count on the survival of their businesses, handbills, renting out these stadiums. St. Louis, how many times has Wash U been where the debates have been held? At least 3 since I can remember that they've been here. That's money. All the media that comes in here and all the attention that's focused on it. It's a big deal for Missouri to do that. That's why they all fight over where these conventions are going to be. Everybody know where the 2 conventions are going to be this year? I've mentioned one of the cities already. Say again? Yeah, Chicago's the Democrat one. It's Milwaukee. And that, again, that's also political. The Republicans need Wisconsin's electoral votes. That's why they're going to Milwaukee. Okay? Well, I think probably because if anybody was looking at some needing to have some good visuals on TV, it's probably the Democrat Party. They're not aware, they're not unaware of the problems the party has right now. You know, inflation and some of the wars and in Afghanistan and because it's one of the big media markets in the country. And you're going to be able to get plenty of hotel space there. There's going to be lots of parties going on there. There's going to be a lot of happy faces on TV with the convention coverage. And that impression is important sometimes as whatever is. Nobody's going to pay attention to their platform. Nobody's going to pay attention to the speeches. They won't be. Remember how they used to get covered, you know, gavel to gavel by the networks? They're not going to do that. CNN will cover some, and MSNBC and Fox News will cover some, but most people will be watching the Kardashians or something, okay, or whatever it is. So that's why they do that. It's very calculated. What do we need? We need good visuals right now. Yeah, optics, exactly. And the Republicans need a ground game in the suburbs of Milwaukee, particularly Waukesha and some of these other areas, and they need turnout in the rural areas of Wisconsin to win that state. Those are 10 electoral votes they need badly. Now, Trump won them in 2016, and it shocked everyone. That whole night, I don't know, the last time those states had not gone to the Democrats, I think, was when Michael Dukakis got defeated. That was 1988, folks. That's a long time ago. So, you know, they're very definitely, what is their plan? Ohio's probably in their grasp. They're worried about Pennsylvania. Both sides are. Why is it that suddenly Israel is getting the short shrift from the Biden administration? Because there's a huge Muslim population around Dearborn, Michigan. And those are people whose votes they need to win those 16 electoral votes. I know it sounds crass, and I'm not criticizing them. That's reality. That's reality. If they're going to get their program through, they've got to have the White House. They need to have Congress. Both parties know that. That's the reality. And this election is shaping up to be one of those, well, I like this guy less than this other guy, and so that maybe that's who I vote for, or something like that. I'm not saying, I'm just saying, you hear that a lot, okay? You know, really? This is the best we can do? Two guys who are in their 80s? Well, that's the choices. If you didn't like it, you should have been involved in the primaries, okay? Of course, most of us, the primaries finished everything long before it got to Missouri, so I don't know what we could have done, but anyway. I'm sorry, I've gone on and on and on. It's probably, oh, we got another question?
One more question.
Okay.
Yeah, I just went online. Just basically asking about, it looks like the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact.
Yeah.
Concern about the current effort to circumvent the Constitution and asking
Yeah.
to speak to this.
My belief that that's unconstitutional. I'm sure there's a lot of very smart lawyers who are convinced that it isn't. Okay, just so you'll know, the National Electoral College Compact says that if enough states pass legislature approving to be part of that they have decided that those states, no matter who wins their states, they will cast their vote, their electoral college vote, on the side of whoever wins the popular vote, okay? That is because they know they'll never get enough supportive legislatures to change the electoral college in the Constitution, okay? And so this is a way to try to get around that. I will say, and we've been seeing this lately as some things have gone on that the Supreme Court ruled on, and then some people decided they're going to go ahead and do it anyway, that the Supreme Court probably will not look kindly on that. But even more than that, there is something in the Constitution says that there can't be compacts between the states. They can't do that. The last one that tried that was in 1861. It was called the Confederate States of America, and it was unconstitutional. So I don't know. We'll see what the Supreme Court says when it goes there, but particularly with the makeup of the Supreme Court right now, I don't think that will pass muster. Now, you'll say to yourself, well, then what's going to happen? Nothing happens until somebody challenges it. In order to challenge it, you have to show you're going to be damaged by it. So my guess is that you'll have to have some states that will be able to prove that their votes were not fairly treated because of this separate compact, but these other states that agree that they're all going to vote for whoever wins the popular vote. when an election happens. And it has to be enough states whose electoral votes will total 270, which is how many you have to win. You have to have 270 electoral votes to win. So I'm hoping personally that that's not the way it was supposed to work. I'm very much in favor of the states continuing to choose the president because it keeps us from being run by one region or one group or one title or other. We talk about how we love diversity, and then when it starts happening, if it doesn't go our way, we get upset. And I just think that's a wrong step to take. But we'll see what the Supreme Court says if it gets challenged. The problem is, it probably won't get challenged unless it gets put into action. And that's what kind of bothers me on that. Yeah. And they can't do it. They can't say, if this ever gets to us, we're voting. That's not the way it works. Supreme Court only works on something when when something has happened, they can show they've been damaged by it, and that's when, and it has to start at the district level. District, appeals court, Supreme Court, okay? There's just no, that's why the Trump cases are taking so long. You think, well, shouldn't they have had a trial by it? He's smartly, as any person on the defense has the right to, is using the court system to go all the way up the line saying, I have been treated unfairly, this is unconstitutional, what's being done to me, and if it has to, it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And, you may lose on that. But the fact of the matter is, you have every right to do that, as every citizen of the United States does. I know I've gone on and on. Did I answer the question, hopefully? Is everybody satisfied? They kind of understand this compact that they're making? I think they're trying to get the public to accept getting rid of the Electoral College. And I remember years ago, a national paper had something about the Electoral College, and they criticized it, and the person who criticized it was a British reporter. And I said, I've got to answer that. And I wrote back to them, and they asked me to make a few changes, which I made, and then they never published it. I wasn't surprised, but it's just, people just don't understand, and they certainly don't understand the reason for it. And I think the framers were very wise the way they set things up. They didn't want any region, they didn't want any particular group. You have to be able to have support in a wide range of the country to be the chief executive. That's the way it should be. Thank you very much for your attention.